Hi guys, so today's video is going to be part 2 of 3 videos where I'm comparing my reading taste to that of other people's based off of Goodreads average ratings and other things I see discussed here on BookTube or with my friends. I started with the most negative, which would be my unpopular opinions, and then today I'm going to be talking about books that I enjoy that other people seem to really dislike, and then the next video will be my basic book opinions, which is where I tend to agree with everybody. But for today, talking about books that I like that other people don't, these are books that almost all of these have lower ratings, and I just think that the ratings should be much higher. So I guess in a way you could say I think these are underrated, but it's more that I'm really surprised at how low some of the ratings are. There's a couple that are actually high, but compared to other books in the same series, I'm surprised that they're lower. But I'm going to start with one of those ones. So this is one of the few where you're like, what are you talking about? That average rating is great. And that would be the Red Rising series, specifically the average rating for Red Rising versus Golden Sun. Red Rising has a fantastic average rating. It's sitting at a comfy 4.23, which is great. That's an amazing average rating, especially because I feel like it's kind of, I've been seeing more people not care for Red Rising, and it used to be all the rage. But Golden Sun, everybody likes more, and I'm like, why? I thought that Red Rising was better than a lot of other people seem to think it is. So many people will tell new to Red Rising readers, hey, just push to the first one because the series gets so good, the second one's so much better. And when I read it, I was like, well, I hope that the third one brings us back. I feel like this book has a little bit of middle book syndrome, but apparently nobody agrees because the average rating goes up significantly. As a reminder, Red Rising is at 4.23, and then Golden Sun is at 4.43. That is so much higher. Obviously, part of it could be that if you liked Red Rising enough to continue the series, and then you enjoyed Golden Sun, then you're going to have less of the people that hated it reading that second one, and that kind of boosts the rating. But still, I swear that I am alone. If you like Red Rising more than Golden Sun, please let me know. I feel so isolated in that opinion, but I just think Red Rising has the emotional pull at the beginning, and then it does have a more familiar type of story throughout the first one, but what I appreciated about that is it kind of settled me into the world so that I felt comfortable with it, and then as we moved into the series, I didn't feel like I was constantly having to learn new things. I like when the first books in series aren't super overly complex or things like that. There are exceptions, of course, but I felt settled in that world. And then I thought the third one was the perfect blend of action and emotional pull. And the second one for me, there's a reveal that happens with something that is mentioned in book 1, and then when you find out in book 2, I think it's supposed to be really shocking and like, oh my gosh, this is so sad. And I remember when I buddy read it with some friends, we all called it pretty much at the beginning of the first one, so that reveal wasn't a big deal to me. There's also another reveal that kind of happens off page that what I mean is that the things that the character does that he then reveals in book 2, you would never know. You could never guess that that was what it was because it was kind of just like, you have no idea, but actually, and I'm like, well, I would have never figured that either. So then it felt like a plot convenience. Plus, it's just way more action, and the emotions just weren't there as much for me. So I'm just against the grain on this one. Next up, and now getting into books that do have a much lower average rating, we have a book that has one of the lowest average ratings I have seen, and I think it is so undeserved, and that would be the Queens of Innisleer, which is at 3.57. That's quite low. And this book is stunning. The writing is absolutely beautiful. It's a standalone, which is pretty rare in adult fantasy or just in fantasy in general. I think it's very well written. It's boring. I always have to say, yes, I agree. It's kind of boring. It's very slow. It took me forever to read. And I can understand why if you pick it up and you're bored, I totally get it. But I still think that it's very well written, so it bums me out that it's so low. Also, of course, it's not necessarily the only reason why people don't like it. They might not like the characters, they might not like the story. It is a King Lear retelling. It is one of those books that, if I think about rereading it, I'm like, whew, I gotta clear my schedule, I can't have anything else going on, and I gotta mentally prepare myself. It's kind of like going on a road trip where maybe the road trip itself is a little tedious, But then once you get to where you're going, you're like, I'm so glad that I went on this road trip. Just sad because I think it deserves to be loved a little bit more, especially because I see so many people say that fantasy books have really basic writing styles and that they're not intellectual enough and things like that. And I'm like, and then when we finally get one that I feel like is a little bit more those things, and then it's like, which it's okay. I just liked the book. Next up, we have one that, this one hurts probably the most. I like Queens of Innisleer, but this one, The Kingdom of Back, how dare you all for not liking this book. Ugh. This is one of those books, you know, really obnoxious fans of something when people don't like something and they're like, you just didn't get it. And you're like, no, I got it, I just didn't like it. I have to fight to not be that obnoxious person over this book. I'm constantly, whenever I see people are like 2-star, 3-star, I'm just like, you didn't get it. And I'm like, that's not true, they just didn't like it, and that's okay. But it is quite metaphorical, and I loved how the parallels between the magical realism fantasy aspects of the story and then the historical fiction aspects of the story. And I'm not even a fan usually of magical realism, but I fell in love with the story. I was shocked. I especially was shocked because I was thinking I wouldn't really like the story because I majored in music and it's about Nannerl Mozart, who is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's sister. And I'm like, a lot of times when people write musical things in books, it just is a little too like artsy, and music is like this thing that can't even be described, and it's a little over the top for me. I was really impressed with how the musical aspects were incorporated into the story. I don't think you have to be a musician to read it. It's just such a shame, and so much of the story is about wanting to be remembered, and you're like, oh, this is so heartbreaking. And then the way that the kind of fae magical aspects are a reflection of things going on and these realizations as our character is getting older is so heartbreaking. 3.72 does not do it justice. It's so good. It's fine for all of you who don't agree. I know it's not that you don't get it. It's just you didn't see it the way I saw it, and that's okay. Next up, we have The Wolf of Oranjaru, which is at 3.75. I'm not sure if this one's average rating is a result of the fact that it was originally self-published, and I don't know that the author had the money at the time to have the book professionally edited. If I'm not mistaken, there is an interview where she talks about financially she just wasn't able to do a lot of things that she wanted to be able to do with this book, that just truly was not an option, but she still had this story to tell. So I'm really grateful that I got picked up because I do quite like this book, but I'm not sure if perhaps when it wasn't as polished and was originally self-published, if maybe that's contributing to the lower rating. I'm not entirely sure. I know another aspect of Wolf of Oranjaru is that the main character is not the most likable of main characters. Completely understand if you're not liking the main character why you wouldn't enjoy the story. But I still think that it should be higher than 3.75. I think that the writing style is quite straightforward but still engrossing and not overly basic. I enjoy seeing the main character be this flawed main character. I read the second one and I enjoyed the second one too, so we'll see what I think of the third one. But overall, as of right now, I just think that pretty straightforward here. I just think the average rating should be higher. Next up, we have For the Wolf. This is a newer release. This is not the absolute most original of stories. I thought it was a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, but it's, I would say, more so a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And to me, it seems like perfect for people who are fans of fantasy that has a mix of both the fantastical and the romantic without being too much of one or the other. It's a really nice blend, I think. And as far as retellings go of Beauty and the Beast, I think it's a stronger one. But obviously, other people don't agree so far. I'm not sure if it just hasn't found the right crowd yet, if people were going into it hoping for it to be one thing and then being surprised when it turned out it was something else. I'm not really sure, because it does seem like a story that the people who really enjoy the romance in their fantasy would really, really like. So I'm not really sure. I haven't pinpointed quite yet why this one isn't doing as well. Next up, we have one that's not super low in its average rating, but again, similar to Red Rising, I'm just surprised at another book in the series being a decent amount higher, and that would be Season of Storms. So this is kind of a side-quel Witcher book. So it takes place between, this is always so confusing to explain, it takes place within a certain time frame of the short stories that we have in the short story collection. So the Witcher series starts out with 2 books that are short story collections, being The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny. Season of Storms kind of fits in between because the first one, The Last Wish, is not told in chronological order. A very interesting way to go about starting your series. But either way, when I read Season of Storms, I thought it felt like a fun side quest, which maybe that's just the video game fan in me appreciating that aspect of it, because the Wild Hunt video game, which is the 3rd Witcher game, is how most Witcher fans came to discover the books, and I loved the video game. And so when I read Season of Storms, I truly was like, oh, this is so fun. I get to see Geralt, I get to see Dandelion, he's going on this interesting mission, basically, and it just maybe filled me with a lot more nostalgia than it filled other people, because it felt like I was back to playing the video game. And one complaint that I actually do heavily agree with the books is that we don't actually spend as much time with Geralt as a lot of us would like. Geralt is a fascinating main character, and we so often go to other people that certain books, it feels like Geralt's not even in them. And Season of Storms is just Geralt. It's mostly Geralt, and that's so fun. It's what I love about Witcher. And I would say, too, if you are a fan of the Witcher video game, I mean, Season of Storms, you can basically just pick up and have a good time with it. It doesn't really affect anything going on in the main series. So I really liked it. But what I find really interesting is The Last Wish, which again is the first collection of short stories, is at 4.12. And because the book is so much less straightforward in its storytelling, I would just think that alone would make it less accessible to people, but evidently not. Next up, we have The Nameless Queen. This one is at 3.55, so quite low. I think it might be the lowest one on the list. This is a YA fantasy about a character from a lower class within this certain city, and then through some unusual circumstances, it turns out that they are technically the next person to rule the land. And this character's like, what? I'm not prepared at all. And you're like, you really aren't prepared. And they don't know what they're doing. They've been living on the streets their whole life. And it is filled with a lot of very familiar fantasy tropes. Where I maybe think that the lower rating comes from is that so many of us who read fantasy have read a story that already sounds like that. I would never disagree with anybody that feels like this book is very similar to a bunch of other things they've already read. I still think that the book was fun. It also is one of the few fantasy books that has 0 romance. It has more of a found family type of trope within it, which I think was really sweet. And I think it's great for young readers. YA, at least in the US, is 12 to 18. And so I think there are a lot of young readers who are very skilled readers and want to read above their current reading, the age range that, like middle grade. Let's say somebody is in the middle grade age range, but they want to read above that. This is perfect. This is definitely a very familiar story to the rest of us, but if you're new to fantasy, it's a great one, and I would say a lot of little kids don't always care about the romance anyway, so it's great that it doesn't have that for the kids that are like, I don't care about this. Well, you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, I just think that, well, yes, I totally have read something like that. A lot of other people seem to as well. I still think that it's a pretty decent story, and the average rating probably shouldn't be as low. That's it for some books that I seem to like more than other people, or other people's opinions kind of surprised me. But I would love to know what books you quite enjoy that you are shocked have such a low rating, or you think certain books in the series are not as good as the one that you think should be higher. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I will have part 1 of this series linked down below. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.